Back to 1258 in Dai Viet, where things are looking pretty grim. If you watched part 1, you know that the Vietnamese people had just seen. In less than 3 weeks, yes, 3 weeks, the Mongols storm past the border, invade the country, cause chaos, and put the capital under siege. Classic Mongol move, right? But remember, just when you think it's all over, that's when the real story begins. According to medieval rule, when you lose the capital, you lose everything. The capital is where all the people are, where all the supplies are stored, basically. It's the heart and soul of the kingdom. Kill the king, and you've got yourself a free-for-all. But the Viet people weren't exactly playing by the rulebook. The Mongols thought they'd have a nice little victory party once they seized the capital. Well, surprise, everyone in the capital vanished. Poof, gone. The Mongols were stuck in a ghost town with nothing to take, no one to defeat, and definitely no victory parade happening anytime soon. The Mongol army was basically the ultimate lightweight, high-speed, no frills invasion force. No massive supply trains, no slow-moving baggage carts, just warriors, horses, and the absolute bare minimum of rations. Their whole philosophy was simple: pack light, move fast, swoop into enemy territory, crush any resistance, raid local villages for supplies, and keep rolling forward like an unstoppable war machine, fueled by plundered grain and sheer momentum. War feeding war. To be fair, it was a brutal but effective system until, of course, they tried it in Dai Viet. Villages were evacuated, food stores were torched or hidden, and suddenly the Mongols found themselves in a very unfamiliar situation: an invasion without a buffet. So, what do you do when your mighty Mongol army is 2 skipped breakfasts away from utter chaos and mutiny? Well, you get creative. You break the army into small groups and send them raiding local villages. Furious, he did what every Mongol commander seemed to do. He let his troops go absolutely feral. They smashed, burned, and cut down anyone unfortunate enough to still be in the city. If this was supposed to be a terrifying message to the people of Dai Viet, well, mission failed. Because instead of breaking their will, the Mongols had just flipped a nationwide rage switch. Every fortress became a fortress of absolute spite. Every village turned into a barricaded nightmare for invaders. They'd buried their supplies, built trenches, and fortified their homes. And what's more, the villagers had received very specific instructions from the court. If the Mongols come, you fight. If you can't win, run into the mountains or forests, but under no circumstances are you to surrender. They actually followed these orders with military precision. The villages were locked and loaded, ready for whatever the Mongols had to throw at them. Anyway, raiding villages for food in hostile territory is kind of like trying to fill a swimming pool with a leaky bucket. It sauce a lot of effort for very little payoff. Plus, every day spent scrounging for scraps gave the Dai Viet forces more time to regroup and plot their next move. Packing up their camp and whatever sad scraps they'd managed to steal, the Mongols hightailed it out of Thang Long and set up shop at Dong Bo Tao. Thang Long was surrounded by all these snaking rivers. It was like the city had built-in natural moats everywhere, creating a massive defensive buffer. The Mongol army, which was still a massive force of nearly 40,000 men, could only sit there and sulk. While the Mongols were still scratching their heads about how to navigate all those pesky rivers and tributaries, the Dai Viet were assembling a dream team. Local troops, check. Private forces from regional lords, double check. By the time they were done, they gathered a whopping 100,000 soldiers at Tien Bao. And let's not forget their secret weapon, warships. The Thien Mac River was their battlefield, parking lot, and fortress, all in one. After weeks of prepping and planning, the Dai Viet Navy, complete with everything from warships to what I can only imagine are some seriously impressive floating battle stations, set sail down the Red River. Their ships were the real deal. These babies had a low profile so they could sneak around like stealthy little ninjas on the water. The front of the boat was all sleek and pointy. Each ship could carry about 60 people, half of whom were paddling like mad to move it along, and the other half were ready to throw down once they got close enough. And the rowers weren't just there for cardio. They could pick up weapons and jump into the fight if needed. Prince Tran, who was all of 18 years old at the time, was handed the reins of command. He was sailing out on a big, multi-deck warship. Behind him, none other than his father, King Tran Tome, was on his own royal boat, ready to lead the charge for the rest of the troops. It's the dead of night on January 28, 1258. The Dai Viet forces extinguished every single light, no torches. No fires, nothing, transforming their fleet into ghost ships silently gliding across the river, closing in on the Mongol camp at Dong Bo Tao. And just when the Mongols were comfortably deep in dreamland, boom! War drums shattered the silence. Torches flared and arrows rained down. The Mongols freaked out. At first, they scrambled in confusion, taking losses on the outer edges of their camp. But let's not forget, these were Mongols. Chaos was practically their middle name. They quickly pulled themselves together, slapped on their armor, grabbed their weapons, and mounted their horses. It's almost unfair. The Dai Viets got the numbers there, well fed, which, by the way, is a huge advantage in battle. Meanwhile, the Mongols had a decent meal in days, and were starting to realize they may have bitten off more than they can chew. By now, the Dai Viet troops had pushed deep onto land, but they were losing the comfort of their floating fortress behind them. The battle was heating up, and then Tran Du saw a gap in the Mongol defenses and led his troops straight through the breach, turning what was already a bad night for the Mongols into an unmitigated disaster. The chaos spread, casualties piled up, and the Mongols probably started wondering if they'd made a huge mistake. By this point, the Dai Viet forces had the Mongols right where they wanted them, surrounded and sweating bullets. And no, not just because of the fierce resistance, but also the weather. Official Yuan and Ming records later blamed the oppressive heat for their retreat. I mean, imagine trying to fight a war when it feels like you're wearing a sauna. While the Dai Viet forces were practically thriving. Remember how Tran Quoc Tuan deliberately dragged out the campaign to make the Mongols fight in Vietnam's signature hot and humid climate? Yup, that plan was working like a charm. If you recall, drop a yes in the comments. If not, go watch our previous episode to catch up on this chef's kiss moment of strategic brilliance. Seriously, it's worth it. You'll see how Tran Tuan orchestrated this whole thing like he had a time machine and a weather app. Anyway, back to the action. Commander Urunkai decided it's time to skedaddle. Forget glory. The Mongols beat a hasty retreat north along the Red and Now rivers. While the Mongols were already known for their savage attacks, their ability to disappear when things got tough was just as legendary. They form up in a long, ragged line. The front half of the group is already looking tired and confused. The middle's probably trying to figure out what happened to the rest of the army. And the back half, well, they're already physically and mentally checked out, just hoping to make it out alive. As they're trying to escape, they run straight into a well-laid trap. Sure, the Dai Viet Navy had a hard time matching Mongol speed, but local militias and villagers were waiting for them on land. Commander Hopbong turned the retreat route into a gauntlet of pain. With ambushes springing up like booby traps everywhere the Mongols turned. By the time the Mongols limped back toward China, they were barely a shadow of their former strength. Urunkai's troops finally reached the border, and right on cue, a squad of Mongol scouts from Dali, Yunnan nowadays, showed up. At that point, the Dai forces called off the chase. Historian Rashid al-Din claims fewer than 5,000 soldiers made it to Narathu to reunite with Kublai Khan. To put it in perspective, the Mongols lost anywhere from 50% to 80% of their original army. That's not just a loss, that's a catastrophic wipeout. Bangkat had seen his fair share of battles, but never had he been humiliated like this. The man had led Mongol conquests across Asia, yet here he was, stumbling back into Yunnan like a gambler who'd lost everything in one reckless bet. But here's the thing about the Mongols. They never took a loss lying down. Barely had Urunkai dusted himself off when Kublai Khan's court sent over a couple of smooth-talking envoys to Dai Viet. Hey, no hard feelings. Let's be friends and take down the Song together. Even after getting a bloody nose, they were still flexing as if they owned half the world, which, to be fair, they did. Tran Tong, however, was not in a forgiving mood. Fresh off his victory and still seething over the Mongols' brutality, he did what any self-respecting ruler would do. He tied up the envoys and kicked them out. No polite refusals, just a straight-up rejection slip with a side of rope. At the same time, he sent envoys to the Song, bringing gifts and subtly suggesting, hey, how about we team up against the Mongols? The problem? The Song were in no shape for a fight. Their empire was hanging by a thread, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the Mongols came knocking. And sure enough, by 1258, the Mongols were back on their nonsense, stronger than ever. They had steamrolled their way across the east and weren't about to stop now. This time, they sent another delegation to Dai Viet with demands for annual tribute. The Mongols were poised to swallow the Song whole, and if Dai Viet didn't play its cards right, it might be next on the menu. So, he took a strategic step back, sending a diplomatic mission, a tribute every 3 years. Just enough to keep the Mongols satisfied without completely bowing to their demands. King Trantong was given the oh-so-cordial title of King of Anama title that basically screamed, "You're a vassal now," and some shiny, expensive gifts. 3 pieces of Western, brocade, and 6 of golden silk, which was a bit more symbolic of Mongol wealth than actually useful. Dai Viet, not wanting to start a war, played it smart. They kept up appearances, bowing and scraping, while low-key avoiding actually acknowledging Mongol dominance. Then, when King Trantong handed over the crown to his son, the Mongols immediately sent an official request. "Hey, King Tran, why don't you come visit us in the Mongol court? Tran Tong pulled the I'm sick card to dodge the request, but Kublai didn't give up that easily. He sent Nur al-Din, one of his guys, to Dai Viet. This guy was the ultimate babysitter, there to keep an eye on things. He didn't have any real authority, but Kublai hoped he'd gather intel on what was going on in this tiny kingdom. Dai Viet managed to win him over, turning him from a Mongol spy into a glorified messenger, who had about as much power as a mailbox. It was a classic case of keep your enemies close, or, in this case, keep your terrifying, horse-riding, empire-devouring neighbors just happy enough to leave you alone for now. While Dai Viet had enjoyed a couple of decades of peace and nation-building, the Song dynasty was in full crisis mode. If you thought the Mongols would take a breather after their failed invasion of Dai Viet, think again. In 1259, Mongol Khan, along with his younger brother Kublai Khan and the ever-reliable General Urankai, decided to go all out against the Song. Unfortunately, in one battle, Moneg marched himself right up to the front lines to personally rally his troops for a final all-out assault. A well-placed stone from a Song catapult came crashing down, and just like that, the Great Khan was no more. The supreme ruler of the Mongol Empire, the man who had planned to crush the Song once and for all, got taken out by gravity. If you know anything about Mongol politics, you know that when a Great Khan dies, all bets are off. Back in Karakorum, Mongol's youngest brother, Arik Bakay, wasted no time. He called a family meeting and declared himself the new Khan. Meanwhile, in northern China, Kublai had other ideas. By 1261, he had rallied his own supporters, held his own Conchoosing ceremony, and declared himself the rightful ruler. This meant that, for a hot minute, there were two Great Khans. The resulting 4-year Mongol civil war was an absolute mess. But in the end, Kublai had something his brother didn't: the economic and military power of northern China. By 1264, Arik Bako had no choice but to surrender, and Kublai Khan became the undisputed ruler of the Mongol Empire. The moment Kublai started gaining the upper hand in the Mongol Civil War, he wasted no time getting back to the Song campaign. By 1271, it was game over for the Song. Kublai took full control, declared himself the emperor of a brand new dynasty, Yuan, and set up shop in Dadu, now known as Beijing. The Tran dynasty of Dai Viet knew exactly what kind of neighbor they were dealing with: an empire that didn't believe in the concept of enough. Dai Viet had been keeping tabs on the whole situation through merchants and diplomats moving between the Mongols and the fallen Song territories. And what they saw wasn't pretty. When the Yuan Empire came knocking, politely requesting some manpower and supplies for their war effort, Dai Viet responded with a firm nope, no soldiers, no resources, no coordination, nothing. They weren't about to help build the forces that would eventually be aimed at their own gates. As long as the Song dynasty was around, they served as a buffer zone against the Mongols. But now, instead of dealing with a fractured China, they were looking at a unified Mongol empire parked right on their northern border. So, by the time the Tran dynasty hit its stride, Dai Viet was running a pretty tight operation. The population was booming, and with more people came more tax revenue and, most importantly, a bigger pool of able-bodied men ready to grab a spear if the country needed. While they had the manpower to field an absolutely massive army, they weren't about to waste resources keeping hundreds of thousands of troops on standby in peacetime. Instead, they stuck to a lean, professional standing army of around 100,000 men. The rest, they were farmers who could turn into soldiers overnight. One day, you're plowing a field. The next day, you're grabbing a sword and marching off to war. Of course, the king also needed a top-tier bodyguard unit. So, in 1267, Tran Thong Tong expanded the elite Imperial Guard. These were the best of the best, numbering around 30,000 men, hand-picked to guard the court and smash enemy forces. In 1262, the Tran family's ancestral homeland was upgraded to Tien Trong, the kingdom's second capital and a backup command center in case the Mongols showed up again. And let's talk logistics. In many medieval societies, armies had to rely on civilian labor to produce weapons, build fortifications, and maintain supplies. So, when a big military campaign came, rulers would yank peasants from their farms and force them to make swords, haul stones, or build ships. Well, if too many farmers were busy with military work, food production suffered, and that meant a serious blow to the economy. But the Tran dynasty avoided this by setting up military factories where blacksmiths, shipbuilders, and engineers worked full-time producing weapons, armor, warships, and even bricks for fortifications. And this system paid off in two major ways. First, the Tran military was always ready for action. They didn't have to panic for weapons and supplies. When war broke out because the production lines were already running smoothly. Second, since professional craftsmen handled the heavy lifting, farmers could stay focused on their fields. This kept food production stable for both daily life and wartime support, and the economy stayed strong. The diplomacy between Dai Viet and the Yuan dynasty during this period was one of cautious responses and strategic stalling. The Yuan dynasty looked at Dai Viet the way a cat looks at a particularly feisty mouse, more trouble than it was worth. For their part, they were convinced that after watching the Song dynasty go up in flames, Dai Viet would take the hint and bend the knee. Kublai preferred to conquer with words before wasting good Mongol horsemen on an actual invasion. He was all about psychological warfare. Why spend years sieging a city when you could just let fear do the job for you? The Mongols would storm into a place, slaughter the first wave of resistance with terrifying brutality, and then release prisoners just so they could run home and spread horror stories. Word traveled fast, and by the time the next town heard the hoofbeats, they were already halfway out the back door. This strategy had worked wonders in Khwarezm, where Genghis Khan made sure that every scholar, scribe, and half-literate person was spared. Why? So they could write about how terrifying the Mongols were. Kublai tried this on Dai Viet, but the Tran dynasty wasn't buying the hype. Over the years, Kublai sent no fewer than 5 diplomatic missions demanding answers, allegiance, or at least some sign that Dai Viet respected Mongol authority. Tributes sent inconsistently with a side of half-baked excuses, summons to the Yuan court politely ignored, rescheduled indefinitely. Because, let's be real, what kind of king abandons his throne just to kneel before some foreign emperor? That's how you end up with a coup. Dai Viet had mastered the game of buying time, stalling negotiations, and sidestepping direct confrontation without ever actually saying no. This continued until Kublai set up an entire puppet government in Dai Viet's name, complete with its own Mongol-approved ruler. If you've been paying attention, you'll know how Dai Viet responded. Before the puppet government could even unpack its bags, Tran Tong took action. Oh, and to make things even more awkward, the Tran court had swapped out their king without bothering to ask the Mongols for permission, something Kublai was very much not pleased about. So, Tran Tong sent troops to the border and wiped out the entire operation. The so-called King of Annam, as the Yuan liked to call Dai Viet, was immediately captured. his entourage obliterated, and anyone foolish enough to collaborate was either executed or conscripted into the Dai Viet army. And so, diplomacy had officially failed. There was only one thing left to do: stop asking and start invading. Let's slow down for a second and do a little geography refresher. Back in the 13th century, half of what is now Vietnam wasn't part of Dai Viet. It was a completely separate kingdom, Campa. Controlling it meant a few key advantages. First, you could easily attack Dai Viet from both the north and the south. Second, you had a direct route westward into Chen La, modern-day Cambodia. And third, if you were feeling particularly ambitious, you could start eyeing Java and the surrounding islands for a little maritime conquest. Campa was conveniently accessible by both land and sea, great for logistics. Conquering Campa was supposed to be the easy part. So, in true work smarter, not harder fashion, Kublai decided to start with the easier target. Take out Champa, establish a foothold, and then squeeze Dai Viet. But reality had other plans. Instead of a quick and easy victory, the Mongols found themselves stuck in an endless, sweaty, jungle-filled brawl that just would not end. Both sides dug in, neither gaining a decisive upper hand, and for the Mongols, this was a logistical nightmare. The Mongol general tasked with cracking Champa, Sag II, after realizing that fighting in Southeast Asia was a whole different problem. Supply lines stretched thin. Food ran out faster than expected, and the enemy just refused to surrender. Sent word back to Kublai with a new plan. "Your Majesty, this is taking forever. Why not make Dai Viet the central target for Southeast Asian conquest? Let's just hit Dai Viet first, and my guys on the Champa border can back you up from the south." Unlike the unpredictable sea routes, Dai Viet could be reached by land. Sure, it was farther, but Mongol armies thrived on land campaigns. Kublai, who initially thought Champa would fall quickly and serve as a stepping stone for the conquest of the entire region, had to face facts. In August 1284, he put his ninth son, Prince Togon, in charge of a full-scale invasion to smash through Dai Viet and clear the way for Mongol domination of Southeast Asia. At this point, it wasn't just about Dai Viet or Champa anymore. The fate of the entire region was on the line. If Dai Viet fell, the Mongols would have a straight shot at the rest of Southeast Asia, and suddenly places like Cambodia, Thailand, and Java would be next on the chopping block. Sure, Dai Viet wasn't just going to roll over and let this happen. What came next was one of the most legendary resistances in history, one that left the mighty Mongols scrambling, scratching their heads, and in some cases, swimming for their lives. But that's a tale best told with the full dramatic flair it deserves. And if you've been waiting for the man, the myth, the legend, Tran Quoc Tuan, your patience is about to pay off. Because now it's time for one of history's greatest generals to take center stage. This is his moment, his masterpiece, his legendary stand against the seemingly unstoppable Mongol war machine. So, stay tuned, because the next chapter is where things get really interesting. And hey, if you're loving this journey through history, do us a favor. Hit like, share, and drop a comment. Thanks for watching.